make a good team, don't we, eh?
Let's do it.
Yes, Charlize Theron is the obvious centerpiece. Of course she is. She is one of the few stars alive who can walk into an action thriller and instantly make the whole thing feel tougher, more expensive, and more physically credible. Put her in the Australian wilderness, give her a traumatic emotional setup, throw a psychopath on her trail, and Netflix already has the bones of something very watchable. But what makes Apex look more interesting than just Charlize survives in nature? The fact that the trailer keeps letting Taron Egerton's energy get stranger, creepier, and more playful than expected, and that changes the whole temperature of the movie. The setup is simple in the way many effective thrillers are simple. Theron plays Sasha, a grieving woman heading into the Australian wild to push herself physically and find some kind of emotional stillness after a devastating loss. On the way, she meets Egerton's character at a gas station, asks for directions, gets hit with a question that already feels wrong, and then continues on into terrain that very quickly stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like a trap. By the time they meet again in the wilderness, and he starts turning the whole encounter into a literal Head Start hunting game, the film stops playing like a grief drama with danger attached and becomes something much meaner. That shift is exactly why the trailer works, because it understands that familiarity alone is not enough on paper. You can describe Apex in a way that sounds like at least 5 other movies. A woman in isolation, a killer in the wild, cat and mouse dynamics, survival, psychological pressure. That skeleton is not new, but the trailer is clearly trying to sell the experience as something sharper than that. It is not just a wilderness thriller. It is a performance duel built around control, fear, and the humiliation of being turned into prey by someone who seems to enjoy the game far too much. Netflix's own Loglini leans right into that, calling it a story about a grieving woman who ends up ensnared in a twisted game with a cunning killer who thinks she is prey. That is a very deliberate phrasing choice. This is not just an attacker. It is a hunter with a self-made mythology, and that is where Egerton suddenly becomes the most interesting part of the whole thing, because he is not being sold like a standard thriller villain. He is being sold like a man performing villainy for his own amusement. That distinction matters. The trailer gives him a bizarrely calm, almost teasing rhythm. He does not come off like a loud monster or a snarling brute. He comes off like somebody who has already decided the world is his game board and wants to see how long Sasha can stay interesting before he ends it. There is something almost theatrical about him, especially once he explains the rules of the chase and starts moving with that crossbow through the wilderness like he is starring in his own private mythology. That kind of performance can go wrong fast if it turns to campy, but if Egerton nails the balance, it could make Apex much more memorable than the average Netflix thriller. And let's be honest, Egerton taking a darker, more unhinged turn is half the reason this trailer gets under your skin, because most people still associate him first with charm, momentum, and emotional likability. Kingsman, Rocketman, even Carry On Netflix, those projects all position him in ways that pull the audience toward him. Apex is flipping that instinct. It is making him a smiling threat in the middle of nowhere. And that reversal gives the trailer some real bite. Charlize Theron, meanwhile, is doing exactly what she needs to do here, grounding the movie. That may sound simple, but it is essential. Because once the premise becomes run until the song ends or die, the movie risks turning into pure pulp unless somebody at the center can keep the emotional injury real. Theron has always been good at that in genre work. She can do hardened, yes, but she can also carry exhaustion, anger, grief, and tactical intelligence all at once. That combination is why action stories bend around her so well. She does not just survive scenes, she stabilizes them. And from what we know, she threw herself hard into the physical demands of this one too. Training in climbing and kayaking for a role that clearly wants the wilderness to feel like a genuine obstacle instead of a digital backdrop. Apex was filmed in New South Wales, and the location is not just there to be pretty, it is there to isolate, to expose. to strip away urban safety and force the conflict into something elemental. Forest, river, rock, distance, and the creeping sense that nature itself is no ally. The trailer leans into that pretty effectively. Wide spaces do not feel liberating here. They feel dangerous because there is nowhere to disappear. Once the hunt starts, every open patch of land feels like a mistake. That is where the movie starts to resemble something older and tougher than a typical modern streaming thriller, not because it is reinventing the genre, because it is using very old thriller logic. Strip everything down, put two people in hostile terrain, give one control, give the other desperation, and let the environment become part of the violence. That still works, and when a director like Baltasar Kormákur is involved, it becomes more plausible that the movie actually knows how to turn landscape into pressure instead of wallpaper. Kormakur has spent years making films where danger feels physical and weathered rather than abstract. Everest, Beast, Adrift, whenever people think of those movies individually, he understands how to shoot humans against indifferent environments and make that clash matter. That makes him a much better fit for Apex than somebody who would direct this whole thing like a glossy studio exercise. There is also the Eric Bana factor. And while the trailer does not revolve around him, his presence adds another layer of credibility to the whole package. Bana is one of those actors who rarely makes genre material less interesting. Even when he is underused, he tends to sharpen the mood just by showing up with that tired, skeptical, grounded energy in a movie that is already built around two very strong central performers. Having Bana in the mix suggests there may be more connective tissue here than just the chase itself. The rating also tells you what kind of movie Netflix thinks this is. Apex is not being sold as a soft suspense ride. It carries mature content warnings tied to strong violence, grisly imagery, nudity, and language, which lines up perfectly with the trailer's tone. This matters because the premise would feel neutered if the movie pulled its punches. A story about being hunted in the wilderness by a man with ritualistic predator energy needs some ugliness in it. Not for shock alone, but because the threat has to feel like it can cross lines without hesitation. Now, does the trailer prove Apex will be great? No, that would be ridiculous. There is still a version of this movie that turns out to be a very watchable, but ultimately disposable weekend Netflix thriller. The kind of film people enjoy for a night, recommend with a shrug, and mostly forget once the next algorithmically promoted title arrives. The survival thriller lane is full of movies like that. A good setup, a strong star, some intensity, then gone. But there is also another version, and that is the version where Apex gets weird enough, mean enough, and committed enough to become one of those nasty little thrillers people keep bringing up because the villain was memorable. The lead was fierce and the chase actually felt dangerous. What I like most about the footage is that it does not rely on mystery box marketing. It is very clear about the engine. You know what the movie is. You know the game. You know the stakes. The question is not what is happening. The question is how far is this movie willing to push its own cruelty and resolve? It gives the audience something immediate to latch onto and lets performance, escalation, and terrain do the heavy lifting. And if the movie hits those notes, it could absolutely work. So where do I land on Apex after this trailer? I think it looks like a strong, nasty Netflix thriller that lives or dies on whether the Charlize Theron dynamic really detonates. Charlize Theron brings the steel. Taron Egerton brings the unstable menace. Baltasar Kormákur brings the environmental pressure. And I think the best sign is this. The trailer does not make me wonder whether Charlize can carry the movie. It makes me wonder how insane Taron is going to let himself become. That is exactly the kind of question a thriller like this should leave you with. So now I want to know what you think. Does Apex look like one of Netflix's stronger thriller bets? Or does it still feel too much like another stylish survival movie that will come and go in a weekend? And more importantly, is Taron Egerton's villain turn the real event here? Or do you think Charlize Theron is still going to overpower the whole movie just by being Charlize Theron? That is the game. And April 24th is getting closer. I'll see you in the next one.